Hi, and thanks for joining me again on Psych Up Live. In a culture that seems unable to disconnect from phones, TVs, computers, video games, and online chats, there are many lonely people who feel disconnected. In fact, it is often a surprise to speak to people who seem to others to be very connected, only to find out they're struggling and they feel alone. What creates the isolation and disconnect that so many feel? Is the feeling of disconnection actually exacerbated by the overuse of the very things from phones to fast food that offer a quick fix? In this show, psychologist Dr. Adam Dorsay draws upon his new and interesting book, Super-Psyched, Unleash the Power of the Four Types of Connection, to consider how our desperate need for connection actually keeps us disconnected. He invites us to consider how we connect to self, others, the world, community, and something greater than self, be it spirituality or nature. He draws upon the theories and strategies of leaders in the field of mental health and related fields and translates them beautifully into usable tools that can improve our lives through understanding and personal connection. Dr. Dorsay is a licensed psychologist and an executive coach in Silicon Valley, where he serves high achieving adults from executives to professional athletes, all surprisingly with disconnection of their own. He has been a keynote speaker for Microsoft, LinkedIn, as well as the California Psychological Association. He's the host of Super-Psyched, an award-winning podcast, and has delivered two highly regarded TEDx talks, one about men and their emotions and the other about friendship in adults. A resiliency expert, Dr. Dorsay co-created an international program for Facebook's online safety employees and is presently the resiliency consultant to DigitalOcean. Dr. Dorsay is the happily married father of
I can see you now.
Okay, and you can hear me now.
I can hear you beautifully.
Okay, and the name of your dog, just so all listeners know, Rafe 3i?
Yeah, you got it,
Yeah.
Rafi.
Oh, it's Rafi. Okay, great. Okay, you start off the book, Adam, with the position that connection is everything. Now, what makes you say that?
You know, I've been hearing the word connection all throughout my life. And as a psychologist who's practiced for approximately 20,000 hours with individuals and couples, the word connection just kept showing up on my podcast, interviewing some of the world's top thought leaders. Again, the word connection, whether it was live or in their books. And I realized this word connection, which has not been well defined. If you look it up in the Webster's dictionary, it kind of describes two things linked together, whether they're ideas, people, or objects. Not a great definition. I don't think that's what all these people keep talking about. And when you look it up in the American Psychological Association, the word connection doesn't even exist. Psych Central has a lackluster definition. What I wanted to do is take a look at what connection actually meant, because it is my contention that it's at the heart of everything we want. Just think about the opposite for a second. You and I both consult the DSM. This is for the people who are not in our profession. This is the Bible of diagnoses in mental health. And if you look at the heart of depression, for example, or mood disorders, it's often a disconnection from the present because we are thinking about the past. With anxiety, we're often disconnected because we're thinking about the future and worried. With trauma, dissociation is a key feature, which is a form of disconnection, and psychosis is a break from reality itself. So it would appear that at the heart of everything we don't want is disconnection,
Mm-hmm.
except for temporary disconnections for us who need a moment of quiet. But I'm talking about real prevalent disconnection. Tom Hanks on the island when he's in that movie and he
Yeah.
befriends a volleyball, and we all understand how important Wilson is to him. I believe it was called Castaway, that movie. Great film.
Right.
Uh, but at the heart of everything we don't want is disconnection. And it would appear that based on the prevalence of the word connection, I want more connection with my wife. I want more connection to nature. I want more connection to my community. I want more connection to my pets, whatever it might be. I want more connection to my hobbies. We know that when we're in flow, we are in deep connection. So it seems to be the precursor to everything we want. So it's my contention that connection is everything.
Yeah. Okay. So in your book, you discuss four types of connection, Adam. Let's take a look at those.
I am so happy to do so, Suzanne. So let's imagine three concentric circles, almost like it's an archery target. At the bullseye, at the center, is connection to self. A lot of us have come to believe that connecting to ourselves is a selfish thing. It's not. Imagine if I was to say, hey, you know what, Suzanne? I want you to connect with everybody around, and I want you to do it while you have a massive head cold, a tack in your finger, and rocks in your shoes. You'd say, my ability to connect might be hampered. And yet we do that all the time by not getting enough sleep, by not meeting our quotas for exercise and the things that allow us to feel connected to ourselves. So it is the connection that informs all the other connections, connecting to ourselves. And each of us has different connection formulas for that. You might be an early morning riser. I might be a late morning riser. You might be someone who meditates but doesn't exercise. I might be someone who exercises but doesn't meditate.
Right.
We all
Right.
have our own thing. And then outside that, it's connecting to others. That's the second circle. How I connect to my significant other, my wife, or my children, or how I'm connecting with you. Or I actually included pets because these days we have incredible amounts of research indicating that our
Absolutely.
pets are so good for us.
Yep.
I used to run the pet loss program at the Humane Society. I can tell you, I've never seen buckets of tears in
Yeah.
larger quantity than people talking about the loss of their pet. The third is connecting with the world. Connecting with the world is connecting with work, where we spend approximately 90,000 hours, connecting with art, connecting with nature, even connecting with our ancestry is connecting with the world. As Maya Angelou once said about ancestry, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you're from. And you're out in Florida, where I used to take videos of my grandparents so that my children who were not yet born would know where they were from.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
talk about that extensively in the book. And then the fourth is connecting with something greater. Now, for some religious people, it would be going to their house of worship or their religion. For others, the most orthodox atheist might go to the Grand Canyon and be awestruck, say, wow. When we experience awe, we are in the midst of something greater. And there's been so much promising research around the
Oh,
subject of
yes.
awe.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
we've become better people. It's almost like gratitude on steroids. So explore all four of those realms, not what they should do, but how they can find their own formulas to meet their connection needs in all of the four areas.
And I'm loving what you're saying about each of them, but I'm wanting to share small is big. So even a small step toward nature is the beginning. Even a small difference in what you and your partner decide to do at breakfast each morning, even a small step towards someone you always walk past every morning or every evening, those, we call them consequential strangers, those are connections.
Mm.
You know, somebody moves, they miss their mail delivery person. They were connected to that person. So I love the idea of the potency of connection and how it's everywhere you look.
I
Um,
am so thrilled that you mentioned that, Suzanne. One thing I don't think I wrote enough about is microdosing connection.
yes,
And as they say in Sesame Street, the people that you meet when you're walking down the street,
yes, yes.
we are, or as Barbara Streisand says, people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. I would actually take issue with that. I think the people who know that they need people are the luckiest people in the world because we all need
Right,
people. But
right.
even these seemingly inconsequential connections give us endogenous hormonal spikes in
Mm.
good areas when it relates to our serotonin, our dopamine, our oxytocin. Just as you said, the mail carrier, I love Mr. Kim. He's my mail carrier.
Yes,
He's
yes.
the nicest guy, and we've had no truly meaningful conversations. but our eyes and our faces say everything. And when we see each other, I would say the half-life of the feel-good hormones is many minutes, if not more. And same thing
Mhm.
can happen with the checkout counter at the grocery store.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always asking these kids, are you in college? What are you doing? But here I'm a psychologist. They ask me about, and every work person who came through at the holiday, I said, would you like a cookie? And they were, yes. I had more fun giving out cookies than I had had in a long time because, it was cold in New York, but it's that connection is really magical. Now, what do you mean by super psyched? What does this super psyched
I
mean?
am so glad you asked that. It does not mean being happy all the time. It
Okay.
actually is something of a pun. It means super connected to our psyches. Our psyches, as Carl Jung mentioned many years ago, I think very accurately, are, is it's our emotions, it's our thoughts, it's our behaviors, it's the part of our brain that informs those. I want people to be super connected to their psyches to ensure that they're alive while they're living. If many of us live kind of the way James Joyce described Mr. Duffy. Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body.
Yeah.
Many of us go through life like that. And it's a really sad way to spend our dash between our birth date and our death date. Super psyched means being super connected to our psyches when we're feeling happy, when we see the person at the grocery store, Mr. Kim, our significant others. It also means feeling super connected when we're in a grief stricken state. We might be really sad. And that's something a lot of people try to cut themselves off from, but it's a part of life. We can't know true happiness unless we've seen the other side. So, super psyched means being connected to all of life's experiences that inform our psyches.
Mm. Now you have some statistics here, so that was so dramatic. I wanted people to hear them. Without realizing it, we often do overlook the connection to self. As you write, Mount Sinai Health System reports the average person waits 3 hours after a heart attack to get help. I mean, just think of it. Most couples, according to Gottman, we all know about Gottman, wait 6 years before getting counseling for problems in the marriage. So it's so interesting. The other thing that, of course, is so relevant is that we see depression, anxiety, PTSD which pulls us away from people. It's though the very inability to connect, which actually escalates that illness and those feelings of emotional disorder and depression. So, back and forth, it comes out even in the statistics that you're putting in the book, the importance of the connection. Now let's think about the connection to a significant other. I told Adam that this was my favorite chapter because I get a kick out of the way he describes his wife, who I don't think is an introvert. I'm going to go online saying that. She sounds wonderful to me, and she sounds out there.
She would love you. She
Okay,
really would.
okay. So, um, well, wait a minute. I should tell people that one of your first requests of her was, okay, I'm here now. Tell me
Oh
everything about
no.
you.
I'm not the
Who's
greatest date starter.
Well, who says this? Talk about being a little extroverted. The fact that she handled that, I get that she can handle anything. So, but let's talk about relationships because in some way you use the word efficiency. That was one of the words you feel when you were thinking about relationships. And I'm thinking, really, what does he mean? So, what do you
Mhm.
mean by that?
So this was conveyed to me by a scholar from overseas. I have not been able to find the study. I mentioned that I can't find the study, but apparently, and by the way, I would pay $100 to anybody who sends me the study. So if you
Okay.
find it, apparently an economist tried to isolate the biggest single predictor of what keeps people together versus what seems to result in divorce. And it's this unsexy term called efficiency. And what he meant by that, according to her, and I trust her because she's a great college professor, and she herself has not been able to find the study, but um, is how quickly do we come to consensus? How aligned are our values? Do you want to rent or buy a home? Do you want to live in the city? Do you want to live in the suburbs? Do you want to live in the country? Do you want to you want to have kids at all? Do you want to have how many kids? agreeing on these important things. Are we a religious household? Are we an a-religious household? Um, do we have kind of an open door policy or a closed door? Are we private? Having these types of similarities. Now, of course, there will be differences between any two people, but the more overlap in values and the efficiency with which decisions are made and fights are resolved seems to be the biggest predictor as to whether or not two people will be able to go the distance in marriage.
Mhm.
And that has absolutely been true. Many of us also, when we're dating, as you mentioned, I said the least sexy thing ever said. In fact, I don't even remember saying it. My wife
Now
had to
you,
remind me that I said
I
this.
see.
But apparently, when I drove nearly 2 hours to get to her home, and my back was sweating and it was a little tight, and I was thinking to myself, my gosh, if there's anything unmarriageable about her that would not work, I want to know about it now. I don't want to make this drive up like 8 times only to find out she's not my person.
Okay, so patience is not one of your big strong
Patience
points
is
again. No.
absolutely not.
Okay,
You can ask. Yes, my kids say
okay,
I'm more patient than I give myself credit for. But
okay.
when I think about my father, who's the embodiment of patience, I have a long way to go. But I also was done just kind of, for lack of a better term, messing around. I decided I needed to be thoughtful in the dating process and only date someone who was absolutely positively marriageable and who made sense to me. Many
Well,
times when we date, we date from our heart or lower organs. And really what we need to be doing is using our brain more. And we need a green light between our head, our heart, our stomach, and the guy below, to make sure that all are having green lights. But it's, I believe, for efficiency, it's got to start with the head. If
okay.
if there's a
Well,
rule out, there's a rule out.
what's interesting is that having been in practice for many, many years, it is sometimes almost shocking that the couple is coming in and they have never really discussed things or refused to believe what the other one's saying.
Mm-hmm.
So in one case, the man stands up, he's a professional person, and he says, so I'm going to leave the marriage. I cannot get through to you. This is to the wife. We are all doing something,
Mm.
and the only thing you're doing is trying to control the rest of us. And it just doesn't work for me anymore. Meanwhile, she continues to report to me everything he does wrong. And I say, he's standing up, he's leaving now. He's going to leave the marriage. And she went on, and he went to the door. And I said to her, take a look at where he is at this point. And it took that much for her to go, what? What are you doing? That is the lack of hearing each other was so profound that it was impossible for them to make decisions together, to come to the same kind of agreement about the teenage kids. That's how separated out they were in terms of the communication, in terms of the connection, really. But so, we're always glad that we're able to play a part in reconstructing and saving some of these marriages, but some we don't. We know that that's the case. And so the connection piece, the communication piece is really big. So on that
Mm.
note, let's talk
Yeah.
about, we'll have to take a brief break in a little while, but the thirds. Tell our audience about the thirds. I'd
Well,
love
first of
this.
all, your story blew my mind. I just need a comment on that before I get into
Okay.
thirds.
Okay.
There is a concept that I think is really, it sounds heady, but trust me, listeners, it's very easy to understand. It's called intersubjectivity. It means that there are two circles. There is my subjective experience and, let's say, my wife's subjective experience. And there's oftentimes, a confluence. There's areas where we see the same thing,
Mhm.
but it's so crucial. I mean, I don't. Your story took my breath away because I don't think I've ever heard something so profound where the intersubjective was being overlooked. She wasn't
Mm.
looking into his subjective experience; she only had hers, and that was reality. And that is profoundly dangerous. So I just needed to
Mm.
comment on that.
Yeah. It's
The
a great way to say it. It's a
Yeah.
very good way
So
to
you
use
just
it. Yeah.
blew my mind. So in terms of thirds, this idea comes, I believe, from Dr. Stan Tatkin,
Yes.
and I love him. He's been on the podcast multiple times, and it's even something I've heard Esther Perel talk about in light of his work. Thirds are anything that could wedge its way between you and your significant other. It could be your pet, could be an in-law, could be a child, could be work, could be the phone these days. The phone is the
Oh,
biggest
yeah.
third. Um, but thirds come in various forms and they exist. We cannot get rid of thirds. We can only manage them. So, one of the things that we want to do is be able to come up with a way to communicate. Here's my cat who just jumped on my lap. She's a third at times between us at this moment. But how well do we manage thirds? Because thirds are inevitable in every relationship. The question is negotiating them well, talking about them openly, coming up with perhaps policies and ways of just diminishing their power over the relationship itself.
Now, sometimes we're going to have to take a break, but sometimes a third, if it's drugs, if it's
Oh my
alcohol, if
gosh,
it's
yes.
another outside person, there's no way we're making this work. On the other hand, thirds could be the children and coming to a joint perspective on he doesn't want to play football. He wants to play the piano. We have to take a look at this child that we share and recognize where his heart and his passion is. So sometimes the third is something that, like a child, that could cause tremendous contention. Like, I played football, he's going to, we know, you know this, I know, we've seen this. And yet when they come together on recognizing his freedom to choose, everybody wins because the couple then is in sync. And the third becomes something to applaud rather than something to divide them.
Absolutely. We need a strong structure that pre-exists the thirds. And oftentimes when I hear people say, we know what this relationship needs is children. No, you better be strong first. And then
Right.
actually it can make it stronger.
Right. We're going to take a brief break. You've been listening to Psych Up Live. We're here with a terrific guest, Dr. Adam Dorsay, psychologist, podcaster, and the author of the important new book, Super-Psyched: Unleash the Power of the Four Types of Connection. Stay with us. Much more to come. Welcome back to Psych Up Live. We're speaking with Dr. Adam Dorsay, psychologist, podcaster, author of the important new book, Super-Psyched, Unleash the Power of the Four Types of Connection. He's terrific. Listen in. So Adam, one thing that really I resonated with working with couples is this hurt cycle. The cycle where someone gets hurt, they react to it in a negative, almost maybe even kind of aggressive kind of way. The other partner thinks, how dare you? The hurt partner apologizes for coming across in that way, but never is that hurt aired.
It's unbelievable how that happens. I hear about this all the time in my office. You hear about it in your office too,
Yes.
I'm guessing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's like something horrible happens to the partner and they explode on the other. So let's say the offense was a 7 out of 10. It was a pretty big one. And the partner explodes with an 8 out of 10. And ultimately, the hurt party, the one who was originally hurt, ends up apologizing and never does the original hurt that was the cause of the explosion get
Yes.
time to be aired.
Well, and I think another version of that cycle is I'm the one hurt. I go silent. Now I'm giving him or her the silent treatment. Now my partner, whoever that is, feels, what is wrong with you? Disconnecting like this? What are you showing the kids? You're not talking at dinner. So very often pain is expressed in such a sort of a difficult way for couples to resonate with it that we don't move forward at all.
And we're never taught how to do this. Deep within us, you and I are both physically adults, but I can guarantee you that our inner child could come out at any time in good ways, like to play and to laugh and goof around, or in really bad ways. I'm hurt, so I'm going to be silent. You know what? I feel disconnected from you, so I'm going to give you the silent treatment. And then who looks like the ass? And the fact is, we don't have sophisticated adulting ways to communicate. We don't know these. And that's what psychotherapy can provide. Reading various books on relationships, listening to podcasts like these can help us be more sophisticated and owning it and saying, oh my gosh, Suzanne, when you shared that private matter about me with your friend, it really hurt me. I own it. I say it, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm not going to blast you. And you have the ability to hear it. And then we can negotiate it. And the question is, how quickly can we repair? And repair is so important. I use the word coordinate a lot. Stan Tatkin likes to think of it, and I think he's one of the greatest, as buddy cop films. Like when we're going through life with a romantic partner or even friends, we need to have each other's back. It's a question of security. And how quickly can we repair? Because inevitably, people hurt people. And hurt people all the more. And what we need to learn how to do is to express the hurt in a manner that is, I use the term personal protective equipment, like what we used in chemistry back in the day, having the goggles, the gloves, and the smock. I think that having good language is tantamount to having personal protective equipment. It allows us to handle potentially combustible conversations and phrase them in a way that's not going to hurt the other person nearly as much and allows the thing to go through a nice pipeline back and forth, and finally it gets resolved rather than building a wall. Harville Hendricks describes the idea of like, this is a very common outcome. I say, I really am bummed out that you said that to, your friend. And then you say, well, I'm bummed out that you did this to me the other day. And then I said, well, yeah, well, remember the other time? We start pulling up the kitchen sink as Gottman describes it. But eventually we create a wall between us and we say, screw it. You know what? It's too big. It's insurmountable. Let's wait 6 years and then maybe go into couple therapy, by which time it's possibly too late.
Well, one of the things that happens, and sometimes you can help couples use it, is you see the very act of me telling you, why would you share my private story with our neighbors? I've now created shame in you. So I have the shame from the story. You have the shame from me telling you. How can you disclose that to people? So now we both are hurting and feeling one down. So I've said it to couples, okay, at that point, you're not going to discuss it again. Now you're going to get into the car, put on oldie music that you love, and just take a ride
It's
and
great.
reset yourself, because there's nothing good coming from you did this, I did this. Nothing. You've got to go back. Music's away. We're going to make pasta now. We're not talking. We're making the homemade pasta now. As soon as the couple feels themselves back in the mutuality of some experience, the shame drops. And sometimes someone says, I really realize what I said. And
It's so poetic, Suzanne, that you use the word pasta, because I was thinking of boiling water. If we're in a boiled hot state and we start throwing the water at each other, we're both
right.
going to get burnt. But if we take some time, go for a drive, maybe make some pasta and wait for the boiling water to become warm or tepid or even cool, we'll be able to have that conversation and say, hey, listen. And I love the idea of coordinating. I mean, once you're doing something in a team like manner, sitting next to each
Right.
other in a car, looking out at the outside together and remembering, oh, wait, it's you and me against the world, so to speak, or you're making pasta, building something,
Yes.
doing something in a coordinated, collaborative manner, and see, coordinated, collaborated, co-manner, rather than us splitting apart and disconnecting. That's genius. I love it, Suzanne.
Yes, it's funny. I remember the other thing we both are aware of, and you mentioned too, is the children are the audience. Whatever's going on at that table, whatever's going on in that car, they don't miss anything. Which is brings us to, I just love it, just as a segue, your technique with children, the rosebud and thorn
Yeah.
exercise. I'm going to try it this weekend with my grandchildren. It's it's terrific. Just tell our listeners what that is, and we'll go back.
Suzanne, this is such a game changer, and it's so simple. What happens when the family's sitting around the table? How's your day? It was fine. And you ask the kids, and
You're
you get
right.
nothing. Nothing. And
Right.
what did you do today at school? Nothing. You know, that's obviously not the truth. So a better way to probe is, through good quality questions. I love the idea that the quality of our questions determines the quality of our life. Good questions mean everything. So having a prime with the rosebud and thorn, I believe it actually, I just learned after the book that it may have come from Boy Scouts of America, the Boy
Okay.
Scouts.
Okay.
But the rosebud and thorn exercise is saying, what the rose is, what good thing happened to you today, Suzanne? The bud is, what did you learn today? Now, I
Yep.
love the bud in particular
Me
because
too.
it tells the children, when the parents, particularly when the parents are talking about their bud, what they learned today, it says to the children, I may not be in school anymore. I may be a successful adult, but I'm still learning every day.
Yep.
And third, the thorn is obviously what hurt today. So all of these three things improve emotional intelligence. They are tantamount to, rather than small talk, they are tantamount to big talk, as one of my guests, Kalina Silverman, described. And what ends up happening, at least at my table, and I'm pretty sure it happens in every table I've heard about, is it becomes, these topics become hyperlinks. Suddenly, better ideas start spinning out from the things that we've heard, and the
Right.
quality of conversation just from this simple intervention, this small thing, as you call it, Suzanne. It's a small thing, but it has, think of it as a seed for a massive tree that grows quickly throughout the meal.
Well, we can even say it's got to have a very positive effect on the parents, the very parents we were talking about having trouble connecting. So you see your children, child, look, this is the bud, or this was the. Now you feel, we're not that bad. Look at our kids. Look what's going on here today. So that the children see you in a very positive light because you're both enjoying this exercise with them. And as you say, the gift to be able to think about and speak. I had sons, and I used to say, well, is it that if you tell me you'll have to kill me, is that it? Because we haven't said a word to each other and we've been driving for a half hour. So when you have something like this, it's very interesting. The older ones will get a kick out of it. They'll get a kick out of it. They will. They'll spice it up in some way, but the little ones will go right for it. And I think it's a couple thing too. I think
And
it's a couple
if
thing
I may,
too.
even, I think that when the older ones see it happening and the excitement that surrounds it all, they
Yep.
will join in after a while.
I think
Oftentimes,
s-
uh, couples have to start modeling it for the children before
Yep.
the children do it. I have two sons. They're very, very boyish boys, really into basketball, sports, and all the things, the cars. They're really into, all that stuff. And they go bananas for the rosebud and thorn, and they look forward to
Good.
it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's terrific. It's terrific. So we talked about the thirds,
Mhm.
and is there any, one thing, of course, we both probably use with our couples, Dr. Patlove talks about hot monogamy, doing something novel together. We know, and even couples know, if they just buy the plane ticket, just make the reservation. Same thing about, which I really loved how you said it. So make the reservation and the plan that you're going to connect. Don't wait to feel in the mood. Put it, make it, this is Saturday night, or this is our Friday night, isn't this our date night? So that no matter what else happened, it's there. Nobody has to feel self-conscious. Nobody has to worry, is he so mad at me that he doesn't even want to be with me? Or have I really, really ruined the week this time? Or so that if it's a part of the marriage or the relationship bond, it's going to happen, the connection.
Love that. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that our children are watching. One of the things they're watching for is how secure are mom and dad in their attachment? Are they
Right.
doing well as a couple? And if they perceive that there is a rift, it is really painful. Now, sometimes
Yes.
they'll try to divide and conquer and say, I'll get permission from one of them because they're not a united front. But in other cases, they'll think to themselves, oh, they may be on the brink of divorce, which could mean catastrophe for my entire world. So
Mm,
if you love your children, make sure you spend adequate time with your spouse and feed and nurture the relationship in ways that are feeding and nurturing to you both, so that your children will feel the half-life of your good vibes between each other, whatever that
absolutely.
means. But I love the Pat Love idea of doing something novel together. We get stuck in a rut. We do automatic things, and guess what? Our relationships become rather automatized as well. And what we want to do is see something new, go to a new place. I come up with all these ideas. Even be a tourist in your own city. Get a travel guide for your town and go places where the tourists go and do them together. And I even took a gray line tour of San Francisco. My wife lived in San Francisco for north of a decade. I lived adjacent for far north of a decade. We both know the city intimately, but on this gray line tour, we were sitting with people from Omaha and Germany,
Yeah,
and they asked where you're from. We're like 50 miles south of here, and we saw things on this tour that we had no idea
it's
about in our
terrific.
own city. So I recommend doing new, novel things. We become more attractive to each other when we are in a kind of a strange place. We are more likely to hold hands. I think Pat Love got it right, and she should, because she wrote Hot Monogamy and she knows
Yeah.
what she's talking about.
Well, even your quote, Fromm's quote, "Love is not a feeling, it's a practice,"
Mm,
is so, it's a beautiful quote to put in. And I think that that's so true. I
mm.
really do. So let's see where the friends come in, the importance of connecting to friends. I think I mentioned at the very beginning, you mentioned something I've never seen in a book, and that is to accept the fact that some friendships are not going to make it, and to value them for what they were, rather than feel guilty, force it, create, strife over it. The fact that you sometimes know someone was so important at some point in life, but it's just not a matchup anymore. Maybe that's a good way to accept it.
I like thinking of us as being chemicals in a way. They're different levels of bonds, and some really are just very short term. You and I were talking offline, and I like even thinking of it in terms of riding the New York subway with somebody. You might just be going from one stop to another stop, and that's the relationship. And we were helpful to each other. Hopefully, there was something really reciprocal that transpired, and we are better for having had each other. Kind of like that song in Wicked, "For the Better," I believe is what it's called,
Mhm.
when Afalba and Galinda part ways. For those of you who haven't seen Wicked, see it; it's amazing. But some of us ride halfway down the line, and we have a longer, but it's run its course. And for some friends, we go the entire way. But it's not all friendship, and it doesn't mean that the friendship was any less important. I've had some really short-lived friendships that I look back on and say, thank God that person was there at that moment. I needed that person.
Right.
Would we be George and Jerry at a deli like in Seinfeld, where the repartee just goes back and forth
Right, right.
forever throughout the rest of our lives? No, that died. There would be long awkward silences and wondering, like, gosh, is this how we want to spend our time? And one of the things I talk about with regard to time, we think it's infinite, but it's not. It's our one non-renewable resource. We can lose our health and get it back. We can lose our money and get it back, but we can't lose our time and get it back. And we only have so much time. And the
Mm.
mere fact that you're using some of your time for this incredible podcast is a really big deal, because these are your heartbeats that you're investing. And it's a statement. This matters enough to me to invest my heartbeats. And I wouldn't want somebody to invest their heartbeats with me if they didn't really want to be with me. And I would imagine they would want the same. They would want me to be all in.
So now let's raise this thorny question. A couple, you have loads of friends. I am kind of a quiet person who doesn't. So the question is, I don't always feel great about you and your wonderful friends. So how do we resolve that balance?
That is such a difficult one. And there are probably about infinite ways to resolve
Yeah,
it.
okay.
But one of them is asking, are just kind of looking back at the concentric circles. How am I filling my own cup? Am I filling my own cup sufficiently, irrespective of others in my life? And having a frank conversation. Gosh, what do I need to do to make quota here? How do we make quota with each other? In light of the fact that you've got your friends, and what's the policy? Do I need to join you and be with your friends where I don't want to be? Or is it totally okay? Do I get a pass? And can I do other things? And that could mean engaging with the world, or spirituality, or something greater. But all four of those concentric circles come into play in this conversation, and it's a negotiation, it's a coordination that has to be frank and honest. And we don't want to consent and resent. We don't want to we don't want to have a yes damn sequence where we say yes to something and damn later.
Mm-hmm.
Consent and resent, where we say yes and we resent ourselves and resent the other person. We want to make sure that this makes sense and that there's the opportunity to renegotiate. Gosh, I thought this would work. It didn't. This would be better. And having that freedom within the relationship to be authentic in that manner. It's not a question of, what's the word that they use? We all have the right and need to realize that sometimes our decision-making processes will not yield the results that we imagined, and that we need to readjust.
Well, the other thing is, in terms of personalities, this happens a lot with retirement. Some people don't need as many friends as their spouse may.
That's exactly right.
And so the recognition that he may love being out there with the guys doing his thing, and she may not. The gift is accepting how different they are and that it's okay. It's when someone now starts to think you should be like them. Why don't you have more friends? Because she really doesn't want a gang around her. So the acceptance of differences that comes to the forefront with retirement, because we've taken the work world out. So now everybody's back to square one with how they spend their time, how many people they need in their life, couple things they do together. So I have this blog in mind called Marriage and Retirement: The Rules of Engagement, because it's so interesting how some people just thrive and other people for a while really need to work on the adjustment.
Absolutely. Let's imagine. Let's go back to the idea of you should be like this. Now let's imagine, like in that cartoon Cars, and I've never said this before, but it just makes sense to me. The cartoon cars, different types of cars. We've
Right.
got Mater, the big old beater up truck. We've got a race car. We've got all different types of cars. Now, would we even for a second suggest that the beat up truck should behave like a race car?
Right.
Not really. You might be able to make some adjustments and make it faster, but similar to comparing, dogs versus horses. I've never seen anybody ride a dog, and I hope I never do, except for little babies who don't really know what they're doing. I remember my toddler tried to get on our collie's back, which was hilarious, and we had to pull him off. Fortunately, the collie was super cool about it. But we have to love who we're with and realize, sure, we can stretch, but relative to ourselves, the most introverted person may only yield 5% more extroversion rather than it's very rare that it's going to be 180 degrees.
Well, I invite couples at times to say, the part of you that wishes he were much more social.
Mm,
Maybe you wouldn't have the part of him that you think is brilliant and that you
that's right.
love talking to him about what's in the paper. They, you just get certain things. So if you can really value certain aspects of your partner, you don't need everybody to have the whole deck. Nobody has the whole deck. And then there's no shame, and then there's no hurt that explodes as anger, and we go on from there. But I think we come from a very similar place in terms of our ideas about couples.
I'm
Adam.
sure we do. I'm sure we do,
Yes,
Suzanne.
yes. So now this was a very interesting segment, and I know we're almost out of time, but I loved your idea that people could expand what they do for a living, no matter what it is, to a much more connected posture.
Mm,
And you mentioned the people working in the hospital cleaning,
mm.
getting involved with patients. And I immediately remembered having heart surgery and the same lady coming every day, and she and I talked every day. And she was a very valuable part of that particular chapter in my life. So that I thought, wow, how about that? The whole idea that wherever are, you can connect. It doesn't have to be official. I love that message.
I love that too. That comes from Amy Resniewski out of Yale School of Management, and it's called job crafting. What she
Yes,
found was that the custodial or the janitorial staff that was deputized to be more interactive with the patients found their work more rewarding than many physicians. So it's really
interesting.
if we're able to think outside the box, how do we get our job done and do something that is truly meaningful that reflects our strengths and values? I would be remiss, by the way. I just need a name, just kind of as a footnote. The quote on love originates from Eric Fromm. It is not my own in terms of love being a practice, but
Yeah, did I
I
say
love.
Franz? Oh, yeah,
You might
okay, yeah.
have, but
Yeah, yeah, I did. Yeah,
it was brilliant psychoanalyst
yeah.
Dr. Eric Fromm, who I just love. The Art of Loving.
Well, what I want our listeners to know is what's exquisite about this book is that Adam has put all of these treasures together in such an interesting way. It's such an interesting way, and it's so valuable to anybody who's going to read it. Um, so I want to ask you, as we're sort of winding down here, um, what else would you say you would underscore for people when you talk about so many people feeling disconnected, um, as a first step in moving toward connection?
I would say look at the things that you're doing throughout your day and ask yourself, do they feed me or bleed me? Do they give me life? And is there something that you used to love doing that you stopped doing? Can you reinvigorate that? Those would be the simplest.
I had this thought, and I've been telling people when people smoked and they took a break and they went outside their building, they not only smoked, they talked to each other. I'm not advocating smoking,
That
but
was
now when they go out and read their phones, they don't talk to anybody.
that's absolutely right.
So that old bad cigarette break was this chat time. And so the question is it possible to go out, glance at your phone, but talk to somebody out there? It's a very isolating experience when they say the cell phone's the new cigarette, the MIT study says.
I
But
absolutely
I
agree.
thought nobody's talking.
Nobody's
But
talking.
so give our listeners a take-home message from you've had so much experience, you've done so many podcasts, so many shows. What's the take-home message you want them to
Probably
remember?
just really appreciating who you are. Don't compare yourself to someone else. Compare yourself to yourself. Compare yourself to yourself today versus who you were yesterday and tomorrow. And are you trending in a direction that allows you to feel more vitality? Since connection, according to the definition that I came up with, a working definition with various other mental health practitioners, is vitality, life force. Do you feel more life force? We don't want to go through life as a limp handshake. We want to go through life as a vital handshake and saying, I am here, I am alive, and it's giving me life and those around me life.
Beautiful. So how can our listeners find your book?
Absolutely. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and dradamdorsay.com, which is my website, Dorsay, DRADAMDORSAY.com is where you
And
find me and reach out to me.
okay, and they can find your podcast on that site too.
Absolutely. I'm available
Okay.
for keynotes. I love doing those. So, but
Okay.
yeah, hope to hear from
Okay.
them.
Well, I love your message. The book is a gift, and I thank you for joining me on Psych Up Live.
Suzanne, it's been a blast.
Okay, thank you. For my listeners, you can hear this and any prior shows, a podcast on my host site, my website, and on the podcast app of your iPhone, as well as all the platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Amazon Audible, etc. Remember to drop me a comment or question at radiohostphillips@gmail.com. Until next